Good afternoon and welcome to this Development Control B Committee. Just a few things to cover before we move to the formal agenda for the meeting. So the meeting is being held under the government's local authorities coronavirus regulations 2020. And to take account of those regulations, Bristol City Council has produced a set of virtual meetings procedure rules, and these are available on our website. And that means that decisions made by this committee will have the same standing and validity as if they were made in person at City Hall. Members of the public who have submitted written public forum statements, your statements have been circulated to all members of the committee prior to the meeting and will be taken into account when decisions for each application are made. Those of you who have indicated that you wish to speak will be called into the meeting at the appropriate point, and we've had confirmation that everyone who is waiting in the waiting room. Members of the public who might be watching, although you'll see a number of different people on the screen during the course of the meeting, just to reiterate that only myself and the other councillors will make the decision on each application, and you can see who we are. We've all got the councillor prefix in front of our names. Members of the committee, just to remind you, please ensure your sound's muted when you're not speaking. When you've spoken, please mute yourself. And if you wish to speak, please use the Zoom raised hand facility, and I'll invite you to speak in the same manner as usual in a normal meeting. If you need to leave for whatever reason, just ensure that we're aware, for instance, by using the chat function. When we move to the vote, we will go through each person one by one and do it as a named vote, so we're sure as to who's voting in what way. When we're moving and seconding on motions, obviously please be clear what you're moving, more so than you would be in a normal meeting, because obviously we're not here face to face. Any questions before we kind of get started properly? Nope, I'm seeing some nods and no one with the urge to speak. So that is item 1, the welcome introduction and safety information. Items 2 and 3 are confirmation of the chair and the vice chair. So to confirm that full council last week on the 21st of May appointed myself as chair and Richard Eddy as vice chair for the municipal year 2020 to 2021. So I ask that the committee note that. Also to note is the committee membership for this municipal year, which is item 4 on the agenda. And item 5, the terms of reference, another one to note that I'm sure you're all aware, having sat on these committees in the past. Item 6 is the dates of future meetings. These are the dates proposed for this year. Does anyone have any issues with those dates? Any need to change them for whatever reason? Don't see anyone who seems to be. Nope. Okay, so we'll take the dates there that are in the. Oh, go on, Joe.
I just want to be clear that everybody on here is aware that every meeting is at 2 p.m. and that anybody who has a job needs to be aware that they're being asked to take time from work for every single meeting. So I just want us to be clear now, whoever is on this committee is aware of that. And there isn't just an assumption that they might be at 6 or something.
Would you like to?
2 o'clock says 2. It says all at 2 p.m. on Wednesdays. And I think, looking at that list, there are no evening meetings. Is that correct?
That is correct. Obviously, if you'd like to propose a change to that, then you're more than welcome to.
I mean, 2 o'clock's not always great for me as a parent with a school-age child, because that does mean I have problems with collection. But obviously, I don't know how long that's, how long it will be before that becomes an issue. But I am aware that other people have jobs where they either have to work from home in the current climate, or they have to be out and away and they can't be. So it is a slight concern to me that 2 p.m. because in the past we've had meetings at different times. I mean, in some ways having them at the same time is easier because then you don't have to remember when they are. But if people have got different commitments, we have to recognise the needs of everybody on the committee. And it may be that some people on the committee think that they don't really have the power to change this. And I just want people to be aware that if they feel that 2 p.m. that every single meeting is not convenient for them, that they should say something.
Absolutely, yeah, we can change it now. Yeah.
Not everyone's as gobby as I am.
Can I bring in some other people that have indicated? So Nicola, you're on mute. Nicola, you're on mute.
I was going to ask that we alternate the meetings between 2 and 6 o'clock, and Joe's already raised it.
Okay. Sultan?
Yeah, I think we discussed that, and we left this option open, that if time comes and if need to be changed, then there is this option available, didn't we, Tom?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So if people now want to change the times or indeed the dates, then this is the time to do so.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's a good proposal, between 2 and 6.
Okay, so any preference for which one's the first one is?
Let's take today's one to 6 o'clock.
Today's 2. Okay, so if we say the 24th of June is 6 p.m., 22nd of July is 2 p.m.
Hang on a minute.
Yeah, I just to make sure you've seen my hand that was up before.
Go. I was just kind of summarising where we're at and then going on to the next people. Go on, Carla, and then Joe. And please use the raise hand function rather than doing this, because I can't necessarily see that. Go on, Carla.
Thanks. So I don't feel strongly about times, but I'm just want to make sure before we make a decision that we have all the information. So this proposal came to the party group leads meeting, and I can't remember who it was that proposed 2 p.m. throughout, but perhaps whoever it was that proposed that could explain why that was the proposal rather than sticking with last year's setup of alternating. My response when we were asked was that either worked fine for me, so I don't mind personally, but there must have been a reason why there was a proposed change.
I think it was just to make it a bit easier for the officers, to be honest. Because obviously the 2 p.m. is during normal working hours for them.
Okay.
Joe?
I'm just to be aware that we obviously do have our COVID briefing every Wednesday. And so anytime...
yeah, we need to avoid that, yeah.
We have to be careful. I mean, 6 p.m. should be okay because they do usually finish. But obviously with the content... I mean, the other problem is it depends on how busy the agenda is.
Yeah.
Because if you're talking about a 6 o'clock start, then followed by sort of 3 or 4 hours of, kind of stress, discussion, that can be quite tricky. But also, to counter that, members of the public can't always be available to participate at 2 o'clock either. So it's an evening meeting. So I think, the reality is we probably do have to alternate. But obviously at the moment we're in a different situation because of furlough and people working from home or whatever. I haven't got strong feelings about which ones are at 2 and which ones are at 6, but it is just more about trying to be fair, really.
Okay, so we obviously need to make a decision on this. It seems like there's some people that would prefer just 2 p.m. and some people prefer alternating. There's the other aspect of ensuring we can keep to the COVID briefing times, and obviously we need to check that the leads can make time. So
in that case, is it better to bring it slightly earlier than 6 o'clock, and then we can finish it and have half an hour or so?
Because I think then we'd have the worst of both worlds, with people who were working who weren't able to join us, and then also people who have other things in the evenings.
Well, at the moment, we're not maintaining 9 to 5 office hours, are we?
I mean, it depends what your job is, I guess.
Most of us is at home from working from home.
Yes, but even so, many employers are still asking people to keep to normal office hours even though they're at home. I know that there's some councillors that have that, for instance. Fee, you've got your hand up.
Just to not, it's going to make a proposal that we alternate between 2 and 6 for this municipal year, and just take a vote on that now, just to get it out of the way, because we could be discussing. I mean, this is a problem that we have with all council meetings. Is it more equitable to have them during the day or in the evening?
Yeah.
It's not the first time we come across this, really. So,
Yeah.
you know, if this has been raised, I just for the sake of argument, because it makes no odds to me, can I propose that we alternate between 2 and 6 and see how we go?
I'm happy with that. Harry, I know you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Well, I was just going to say in reply to Sultan that we can't start before 6 because we do want to attend a briefing.
Yeah, we've already noted that.
I'm very happy with Fee's suggestion.
Is anyone against that suggestion?
Can I, just to intervene, Chair, one thing you will need to clarify is the issue of the proposed Thursday dates. Do you want to have all the meetings on a Wednesday, or because I know there was an issue for you, Chair?
Yeah, I mean, that only came because just so everyone's aware, that only came out because I have another council related meeting at that time. But I think we can.
So you could say all on Wednesday unless there happens to be a clash.
Yeah.
That would be one way of doing it, and in the 2 p.m. cycle.
But yeah, moving them to 6 p.m. will fix that. Yeah. Do you follow me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Sorry. I did say yes. Sorry.
All right. Okay. So we'll do alternating 2 p.m. 6 p.m. Take this as the 2 p.m. So the next one will be 6 p.m. So the June one will be 6 p.m. July 2 p.m. So on and so on. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Right. Let's move on. So item 7 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we have apology from Ollie Mead, Councillor Ollie Mead, and Leslie Alexander isn't in attendance but hasn't actually given an apology. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any declarations of interest? No. Joe and Harriet, your hands are still up from the previous discussion, by the way. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes? Carla?
Just one thing I want to clarify on page 15 of the papers. So that's in the Upper York Street item. Halfway through the bullet points at the bottom of that page, it says, if someone deliberately allows a listed building to fall into repair, the local authority should take this into account in any decision. I may be mistaken, but I just wanted to check that that is should rather than shouldn't, because my understanding from previous decisions was that generally planning authorities can't take into account the behaviour of an applicant. You just have to consider the application as is.
I believe that's with regards to it falling into disrepair specifically rather than the general behaviour of the applicant, in which case we can, but maybe Gary wants to clarify on that.
Yes, Chair, I can clarify that. I think I think you've summed it up, Chair. Really, it's about if the poor condition of a listed building is a material planning consideration, how that has happened, you can attach weight to that. So I think that the minutes are correct to say that, and that it's how the building got into that position itself that's material, rather than general behaviour, character issues with a particular applicant.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Just wanted to check.
Sure, thanks. Anyone else? Any comments? Can I have a seconder then to sign off on the minutes, please? Richard got there first, I think. So that's Councillor Reddy. Okay, next item is appeals. Over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. There's just a couple of points I just wanted to make, just by means of clarity and explanation. So I'll try and share my screen. Hopefully that will work. Are you seeing the appeals report?
Yes, it's coming up.
Because I've got two screens now. I can't see exactly what you're seeing. So there, hopefully you can see. This is. So I just wanted to focus on appeal decisions that have been received since the last meeting. As you may predict, that we've receiving less at the moment. But two that have been received since the last meeting are just worthy of further comment, and these are the ones highlighted, items 43 and 44. And you'll see in terms of decision and date decided that they were both appeals that were dismissed, and they also have this reference at costs not awarded. So appeal dismissed meant that the council's decision was the correct one and it has been upheld. So appeal dismissed, planning permission refused. And wherever we make a reference to costs in the decision column, it's where costs have been applied for by the appellant. And in this case, I'm glad to say costs have not been awarded. And just to explain that with planning appeals, unlike court hearings, applications for costs and the decision of it doesn't necessarily follow the actual decision. So it's perfectly possible for us to say to lose an appeal and not have costs awarded against us, and also to win an appeal, so have an appeal dismissed and have costs awarded against us if in any way the council has felt to have acted unreasonably. So coincidentally, this happened in these two cases where appeals were dismissed. In both cases, again, totally different sites, different applicants, costs were applied for, and in both cases, the inspector looked at the approach that the council had taken and felt that its decisions to refuse planning permission were done on a reasonable basis. So I'm glad to confirm that was the case there, both appeals dismissed and costs not awarded. But as that's a bit of a curious thing for us to put on one of these reports, I just thought I'd give you a bit more explanation, Chair. But happy to take any further questions.
Thank you. Joe, do you have a question?
Yeah, just curious, why would you refuse an application to turn an HMO back into a single dwelling?
That's a very good question, and certainly the first thing I looked at when I was reading up for this item. And so in terms of the principle of the development, the principle of the HMO going back to a single dwelling, the council had no problem with that whatsoever. I think it was as part of that, I think an outbuilding, I think was either being reused or converted to a garage, and I think it was related to the access arrangements around that. So my conclusion would be, you know, if the application came back in, omitting that matter, I'm sure it'd be approved. So, but you know, it's a very good question and one that I wanted to satisfy myself about.
Thanks. Any other questions on the appeals? Okay, shall we move on to enforcement then? Back to you, Gary.
So very briefly, Chair, I won't put these up unless members want me to, but since the last meeting, we've had 5 notices served. So there's still enforcement activity happening, but just again to reassure you really, as and when these relate to commercial premises, and we know that the pressure that commercial businesses are under at the moment, whilst enforcement action may have been taken, we will take a very measured approach to the compliance with those notices. Of course, they'll have to be complied with, but we'll enter into a dialogue with any businesses affected by those notices, which I think does apply to item number 1, the one on Gloucester Road. But happy to take any further questions, Chair.
Thanks. Any questions? Nope. Okay, thank you, Gary. So the next item on the agenda is the public forum. Just to make the public aware, the way we do public forum at development control meetings is we take it before each application, rather than at the beginning of meeting, as in kind of normal council meetings, which is why we've only just got to it. We have 2 applications to discuss today, Belvedere Road and the former St John's Lane Health Centre. The latter doesn't have any members of the public who wish to speak. So unless any members of the committee have any objections, I propose to switch the order compared to that which is proposed in the papers and do Belvedere Road first to allow the members of the public who are with us to get their have their say and get on with their days. Does anyone oppose to that? Okay, thanks. So let's move to Belvedere Road then. Again, just to make sure the members of the public are kind of following us, this application was considered at the previous meeting of this committee, which decided it was minded to refuse the application, but deferred the decision to allow our officers to go back and think of reasons for refusal that would be kind of well thought out and would stand up in, for instance, appeal scenarios. So that's the history. So first of all, let's move to the public forum. The first person we have is Mark Willis. Hopefully Mark can now be let into the meeting.
So participant for statement 10 is now in the room. Can you please state your name? Participant for statement number 10, can you please state your name?
You're on mute, if that helps.
How's that? How's that?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can hear you now, yeah.
Good, good.
If you could state your name for the committee.
Yeah, my name's Mark Willis.
Hi, Mark. So you've got about a minute to tell us about your statement.
Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of the application on behalf of Medicare. I was able to watch the previous meeting online and note the content of the update report. I note that officers maintain their view in respect of the mix of uses in the street and in respect of the impact of the development on residential amenity, and they do not support refusal on these grounds. As we know, the main issue is parking. We provided more information about the travel patterns of care staff and visitors to the care home. Officers say little weight should be attached to the parking survey because the plans attached appear to indicate that 1 or 2 spaces may be partially across existing accesses, but this was never the case. However, the parking survey is a red herring. The main point is that 7 Belvedere Road already has 1 4-bedroom flat and 2 large 2-bedroom flats. And planning permission has been granted to excavate the basement so that the ground and basement level flats would have 3 double and 1 single bedrooms. The fallback position is a building which contains 3 large flats with 7 double and 1 single bedrooms. These 3 flats can comfortably accommodate 15 economically active adults. Even if only half of them have cars, there's a reasonable expectation of a demand for at least 7 car parking spaces. The extension to the care home will need 2 extra care staff, and the evidence shows that most care staff do not drive to work. There may be 5 additional visitors per day. Many visitors come in family groups and only stay for an hour or 2, and only about half will be visiting by car.
Could you sum up, please?
Yeah. We don't dispute that local residents are frustrated with parking issues, but the future occupiers of the care home, they're Bristol residents too. They're among the most vulnerable people in the city, and their voice needs to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So the next member of the public we have is Mary Carroll.
Yeah, participant for statement number 13 is in the room. Could you please state your name? Participant for statement number 13, could you please state your name?
If you're speaking and we're not hearing you, you're probably on mute.
Sorry. Hello?
We can hear you now.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
You
Hi.
identify yourself.
Hi. Thank you. I'm asking
You
you
please,
to
can you say your name, sorry, for the record?
Mary Carroll.
Hi, Mary. So you've got a minute. Go ahead.
Thank you. I am asking you, as a resident, to continue to reject this application and highlighting 2 points to strengthen the grounds of over-concentration. Already, every single nursing home in the Redland ward is located in Belvedere Road. If the application goes ahead, more than 50% of the residents of the street will be nursing home patients, compared to just 0.63% of the national population. The concentration on this road is evidently out of all proportion to local and national levels, and it cannot be allowed to increase. This application would also remove much needed homes for young families who use local schools and provide business to local shops. Sadly, the patients are primarily in end-of-life care. They're never taken out. They do not benefit from the location or contribute to the community. The report is actually misleading and blatantly misquotes the application in suggesting otherwise. I've provided full supporting detail in my written statement that supports all of this, and I ask the committee to support the refusal on these grounds and hopefully use this to strengthen the arguments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The third member of the public we have is Laura McEwen.
Laura McEwen is entering the room, Chair. It's just taking a bit longer than before.
All right, no worries. Just to note while we're waiting that Leslie Alexander's joined us. Leslie, you joined after the public forum started, so you won't be able to take part in this item, I'm afraid. And also, please, can you show your video and change your name to have the councillor prefix?
I'm afraid Laura McEwen hasn't entered the room yet, Chair.
Is it a system issue or is it on,
it looks like it's a system
end?
issue. It says joining, but she hasn't appeared.
Should we try the next person and come back to Laura?
Okay.
Would that?
Yeah.
See if it fixes in the meantime. So the next person is Oliver Bennett.
Participant for statement 16, you are now in the meeting room. Can you please state your name?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, can you please state your name?
My name is Oliver Bennett.
Hi, Oliver. Go ahead, you've got a minute.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to make... Oliver Bennett. Okay. I would like to make 2 additional points. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Yep. I would like to make 2 additional points. I seem to be getting a time lag with...
I
would...
Signals coming and going or sounds coming and going there.
Do you want to try starting again, Oliver?
Okay. I would like to make 2 additional points concerning the case for refusal of this application on the grounds of parking. Firstly, the officers... You can't hear me?
We heard you up to the officer's hat and then you stopped.
Okay, Fine, I'll start again. Yeah, I will. I would like to make 2 additional points.
We've lost you again.
Yeah. Are you, is the webcast on in the background? Is that the lag that you're mentioning? 'Cause if so, close the webcast, because that'll be...
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'll start again. I would like to make 2 additional... No, the webcast is off.
I don't know whether it may be a good idea to try going back out and coming back in, maybe.
Okay.
It's a problem.
Can you hear me now?
You can, but your sound keeps going sporadic.
Right.
Oliver, I will move you back into the waiting room and readmit you.
Okay, thank you.
You try that again and see if that solves the problem.
Hello, participant for statement 16. Can you please state your name?
Bennett. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. Right. I would like to make 2 additional points concerning the case for refusal on the grounds of parking. Firstly, the officers have already made clear that 2 extended delivery bays would be required if this development were to go ahead. This would necessitate the removal of a total of 4 parking spaces from the road, clearly adding to the parking congestion that officers have already identified as a major problem in a neighbouring planning application that was refused in only March last year. Secondly, the officers have accepted as fact the claim made by the applicant that staff increases due to this development would result in the use of only 1 extra car. This is not a fact, it is an estimate. In my written report, I have produced evidence to show that this estimate is unreliable. Staff increases are likely to lead to the use of 4 to 5 extra cars, leading to yet further parking congestion. I believe that both of these points should be used to inform the final decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's try and move back to Laura McEwen. See if it works on the second attempt.
I'm afraid Laura McEwen is unable to enter the room, Chair, at the moment.
Okay, could you maybe advise her to close Zoom completely and restart the app, and maybe that'll help. And let's move on to Samantha Mant then.
No.
I'm afraid Laura McEwen. Participant for statement 17, you are now in the room. Can you please state your name?
Hi, I'm Samantha Mant.
Hi, Samantha. Please go ahead. You've got a minute.
Lovely, thank you. My statement is to continue refusal of the application. Belvedere Road already suffers from significant, highly impactful over-concentration of commercial use in what should be a residential street in a conservation area. Referencing support from policy DM2 is entirely inconsistent with our reality. Glenview is advertised as a dementia care home, so residents' requirement for local facilities is zero. And the staff are only seen getting in and out of their cars or their lifts. I noticed the comment earlier about they don't drive, well, then they're driven. We welcome the continuation of number 7 as a family home. The disruption we suffer is on a daily basis, and it includes the health risks of clinical waste being left beside the street. We've got the impossibility of parking for parents with children and shopping, tradesmen trying and failing to be able to attend appointments, and visitors to elderly and our vulnerable residents just simply having to give up. We've got regular long delays and obstruction in the street for the deliveries of goods and people, and collections of waste and people. And the parking bays won't fix this, as the vehicles used are large vehicles and considerably longer than 2 car lengths. And we've got the general destruction of what is a classic Bristol street scene. We have sleep disturbance, property damage, noise.
Can you sum up, please?
Pollution. Basically, the further demand will only make this much worse and make living along Belvedere Road really intolerable and unsafe. And it's not fair, sustainable, or democratic. And we believe that these additional beds will be so much better somewhere else where it's more suitable for the residents' needs. So please continue to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person, let's move on to Mark Dowds.
Hello, participant for statement number 31. You are now in the meeting room. Can you please state your name?
You may be on mute.
Could you please unmute?
Yes, my name is Major Mark Dowds, and I live on Belvedere Road.
Hi, Mark. Please go ahead. You've got a minute.
Okay, so the proposed development will have a dramatic negative impact on the other residents in the area. The situation regarding parking and access to the street is already unworkable. On a daily basis, residential driveways are blocked by delivery vans and trade vans working in the care homes, and ambulances are routinely forced to block off the roads at both ends due to the lack of provision for them to access the care homes. As a serving member of the military, I am routinely required to be separated from my family, and I'm only able to do this in the knowledge that my family is safe and secure and comfortable in the home that I am issued. The importance of this cannot be underestimated, and its value is hard to quantify. The time that service personnel get to have with family and loved ones in their home is valuable, and to have that destroyed by being unable to get into your home or enjoy the peace of your home and garden in the summer due to construction noise, dust and disruption is unthinkable and incredibly distressing. I understand the need for additional care homes in the Bristol area, and I'm sympathetic to the desire to expand the business, but I do not feel that this should be at the expense of the local community. And I ask that you consider the unique requirements and the additional burden and impact that this stress and disruption will have not only on the military families, but all the families in the local community. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's try third time lucky with Laura McEwen, and then I think we'll have to move on.
So Chair Laura McEwen logged off and logged back in. I've just admitted her into the room. She's joining.
Fingers crossed.
Participant for statement 14, can you please state your name?
Laura McEwen.
Hi, Laura. Please go ahead. You've got a minute.
I'm speaking as a mother to 3 children and on behalf of all parents who live on the road, of which there are many. There's nothing we can do about what's going on already in our road, and I've had meetings with Councillor Fodor and Councillor Hance about this situation across the last 2 years. However, we can stop things from getting worse by rejecting this application today on as many grounds as possible. These roads are extremely dangerous. This is a main walking route for children to and from school and for residents of Westbury Park to access the Downs. Cars, delivery drivers, ambulances, private ambulances, waste vehicles endlessly circle this road, looking for spaces to access these 3 commercial businesses. Along with this comes lots of occasions of aggression, and my children have witnessed this many times. It is basically a boiling pot. These nursing homes are end-of-life care, so ambulances frequent the roads daily. They always block the roads, and as residents, we cannot ask ambulances to move as they are seeing to patients. There are many private ambulances too for the patients who sadly pass away, and this happens frequently. As I stress, this is end-of-life care. This has forced my children to ask many difficult questions from things they have seen, and I'm not going to point out today more about that. That's been specified in the statements that we have made. There is no discretion for the elderly. Everything from these homes is done from the front door. Enough is enough. If this approval is accepted today and passed through, it's only a matter of time until we will be here again objecting to yet another application from this very same developer. He shows no signs of stopping, and with each new development, more and more people—
Can you draw to a close, please?
Yeah, just with each new application and development that takes place, more and more people are leaving our road because the situation becomes more and more unbearable. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the public forum. Thanks for bearing with us whilst we had some teething problems, but obviously it's important to have the public as part of our meetings. Let's move on therefore to the next part of the discussion, which is the officer's report.
Thank you, Chair. I shall just share my screen, the presentation. Hopefully you can all see that.
It's loading.
Cool.
Yep, can see it.
Great stuff. So as you all know, this application seeks full planning permission for a 17-bed extension to an existing 40-bed care home at 7 Belvedere Road, Redland. As I introduced the scheme to members last time at committee, I'll move straight forward onto the key issues. So the application was deferred by members who were minded to refuse at the last committee with a request for further information from officers to test the following. So whether the proposed development would have an unacceptable impact on car parking and transport on highways, and whether the change of use would result in an over-concentration of care homes in the area. This presentation provides a summary of our considerations and the assessment of those issues, as well as a response regarding the relevance of the location of the development. So just to summarise the level of public interest and statements to committee. So a total of 30 statements were submitted to the previous committee in April, of which 7 of those have been carried over, and a further 29 statements have been submitted for this committee, either replacing or in addition to the previous statements. Of these 36 total statements, 35 of them raise objections to the scheme. So just moving on to the key issues. With regard to parking, officers have reviewed the additional information submitted by both the applicant and also from neighbours with transport development management officers, and a further site visit was also carried out. At the last committee meeting, the approach to the parking survey was not clear, and there are a few moments of confusion regarding that. Whereby the applicant's report stated that the survey was carried out over a 2-hour period, but the BCC's parking methodology requires a snapshot approach. The applicant, after several requests from officers, has clarified that a total of 5 snapshots were undertaken over the 2-hour surveys. Apparently this was, the submitted surveys were chosen as they demonstrated a worst case. However, this has not been substantiated. Each identified space within the parking surveys that were submitted has been reviewed by TDM and planning officers, and then reviewed against Google Street View and then confirmed via the site visit. So as shown on screen now, 2 of the spaces that were shown on the survey were in fact in front of drop curbs, so in front of number 6 Belvedere Road and number 20 Belvedere Road. Whilst the applicant has stated that these errors are because of drafting issues, it's considered that there are sufficient inaccuracies within the survey, and therefore they should not be given great weight in forming a recommendation to members. Returning to the parking survey methodology, it requires that all other parking and waiting restrictions, bus lay-bys, curb build-outs, controlled and uncontrolled crossing areas and vehicular crossovers should be shown on the plans, and this has not been done. It also recommends that photographs of the parking conditions in the survey area can be provided to back up the results. And unfortunately, those haven't been submitted as part of the parking survey, and it probably would have provided clarification on the timings of the survey and also the positions of the drop curbs. But as I say, this is missing. Weighed against the submissions of the neighbours, which clearly demonstrate that there are parking issues on the street and issues with loading and traffic, officers conclude that there would be an unacceptable impact on parking as a result of the change of use. Moving on to the mixed and balanced communities issue that was discussed at the last committee. So the proposal was assessed against policy BCS 18, and this requires development to meet housing needs, contribute to the diversity of housing in the local area, respond to the requirements of a changing population, employ imaginative design solutions. This policy does not, however, define what a tipping point would be in terms of a mix. Policy DM2 has also been considered as a proposal for a form of shared housing, and this sets out that proposals could be refused if they reduce the choice of homes area in an area by changing the housing mix. So the results of the assessment are on the slide. So that's drawn from census data and then also from mapping information available on BCC's Pinpoint. The overwhelming majority of the buildings on Belvedere Road would not be shared housing, it's considered that the proposal would not reduce housing choice or fail to meet the criteria of BCS 18, which, as I say, are meeting housing needs, contributing to diversity of housing and responding to the requirements of a changing population. And just finally, the members queried at the last meeting why consideration was given to the site's location if residents weren't likely to be particularly mobile. So I just want to clarify that obviously enabling access for both visitors and staff via foot or public transport is just as important as for the residents themselves. So would obviously ask members to weigh this against the parking issues that we've highlighted earlier. In terms of the recommendation, so just want to flag to members of the committee that there was an error on page 55 of the reports pack, and that hadn't been updated to reflect the change in the recommendation. So officers are now recommending refusal on parking grounds based on the uncertainty on the over the parking survey and the evidence of the parking issues submitted by neighbours. So we conclude that the development would proposed development would result in an unacceptable increase on the demand for parking, leading to inappropriate on-street parking activities, safety concerns, and potentially the obstruction of access to private driveways. Members may also wish to consider issues of over-concentration on the grounds of mix and balance and harms residential amenity with the reasons on screen now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So let's move to questions. Could I stress with members for the questions and comment section, if we can kind of concentrate on the new information since the previous meeting, that would be the best thing to do rather than going over old ground. But if there's obviously something important, then don't stop yourself from saying it. Fee got in there first with a hand up. I'll go to you, Fee.
Oh, great, let me mute myself. Just a quick question. You said, Alex, that the question of where the tipping point lay around when something was tipped into being unacceptable over proportion of a particular type of housing in an area was basically down to the officer's discretion. It wasn't laid down anywhere. And then subsequently you said, but clearly the overwhelming majority of houses will continue to be residential. I'm slightly confused about how those two sentences mesh together. So does there have to be an overwhelming majority of a new type of housing for it to hit that tipping point, would you say? Or could you say that the tipping point was, do we have the discretion to say that that tipping point into unacceptable development has been hit without there being an overwhelming majority of a particular type of housing? Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I'm slightly garbled, but my question is one of understanding, and I'm trying to tease out what the criteria are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really, really tricky thing to, as I say, assess, given that it's not defined in policy. And I think it's kind of linked to those harmful conditions that are referenced in policy DM2, and then also the positive, what I would probably describe more as positive conditions in policy BCS 18, which is why I read those out. So on the basis of the development wouldn't result in a sort of a complete change to the diversity of the housing in the area. Obviously, aging population and responding to the requirements of a changing population. And then also there was still sufficient housing on the street in terms of a majority that would be able to meet housing needs for families, for example, or for those who weren't in shared accommodation. So I guess the sort of proportional element or a percentage tipping point is quite hard to define, but basically we've assessed against those bullet points that are in the policies and have concluded that there isn't an over concentration on that basis.
So in your view, you're saying, so if there is sufficient housing in the street, if it still is a majority, but that is your point made on your discretion, isn't it? It's one that we could disagree with legitimately.
Yes, yeah, providing obviously you're demonstrating that the policy doesn't accord with those elements of the policies that we're assessing against.
Okay, is that okay for you? Yeah. Any other questions? Leslie, I know you've got your hand up, but you joined after we started the public forum for this item, so you're not able to take part in this item, I'm afraid. Does anyone else? Is that Richard? Yeah. You were doing the thumbs up rather than the raised hand, but I saw it. Don't worry. Go on, Richard.
In Alex's report, he said that he worked out that about 20%, 29% of the homes in Belvedere Road would be actually care homes. But this contrasts with what one of the residents suggested of over 50% if this application went ahead. How would Alex account for the difference?
So the difference would be, in my report, it's an assessment of the numbers of buildings. So obviously there may be a slightly higher occupation level within a care home compared to sort of other buildings on the street. However, we don't have sort of data for or current data for every single bedroom and every single occupant within the street. So unfortunately at that level we had to rely on the numbers of buildings, whereas at census level we're obviously able to account for every person, but that data is now it's obviously 2011, so we considered that a sort of more up-to-date picture would be the assessment on the road of the buildings. I'm quite surprised to hear from sort of neighbours that it would be as high as 50%. That would account for obviously quite an intense occupation of the houses and a much lower, well, effectively double the occupation of those buildings that are in care homes in comparison to the buildings that are not in care home use. To sort of equate to that, but yeah, as I say, we're not able to do that because we don't know how many people are living in that in each of those bedrooms, for example.
Okay, Joe, I've got you next.
You just saw my comment, Tom. I just sent to you that I actually put.
Oh right, yeah, sorry, yeah, go on.
So.
It's the issue of looking at like 3 screens at once. Go, Harriet. Do you have a question? You're on mute. Harriet, you're on mute.
You're shedding a bit into comment, but I'm just a bit concerned by this discussion of concentration because it seems to exist entirely on this head count. And surely when we're talking about over concentration, we're thinking about the way the street is used. So you've got all these problems that have been referred to about children having to observe dead bodies being carted down the street, the waste overflowing. So that although whether or not there are enough heads, as it were, to balance out the older heads with the younger heads, surely the problem is that the older heads are monopolising too much of the street, and that's what, to me, makes it over concentration. So it just seems to me
is there a question in there?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to say, isn't there a broader sense of over concentration than just merely counting who lives in what house?
Yeah, absolutely. I would completely agree. So I'll just refer and just read back so the relevant parts of the policy. So for BCS 18, it is a sort of concentration of housing mix and contribution. So it requires development to meet housing needs, diversity of housing in the local area, and responding to the requirements of a changing population. So that's policy BCS 18. Sorry, BCS 18. Policy DM2, however, does include those elements of what a harmful concentration could result in. So I will just quickly share my screen again, just with the relevant text from policy DM2. So worsening existing harmful conditions, and that includes excessive noise and disturbance and inadequate storage of refuse and recycling. So we considered that there wasn't sufficient evidence of that. Obviously some anecdotal photos and sort of statements from members of the public, but there weren't things like noise complaints that had been registered with our environmental health officer, for example, that would warrant refusal of the application. So it has been considered on both, on not just a head count, but also those harmful impacts as well. I hope that sort of answers your question, Councillor Bradley.
Yeah. Okay. Fee did have her hand up and is taking it down again. Nicola, you're on mute.
Could we have some clarification of what a disturbance is?
And just general noise and disturbance. So we would typically assess that in sort of cooperation with our environmental health officers. So that would be reports to either the council's pollution control team or to police. So we do that with HMOs, for example, with other forms of shared housing, as that's one of the criteria. So in terms of an actual report of noise and disturbance, we're looking for registered complaints. But obviously that range can be any sort of noise that you can sort of imagine, but generally it's people making noise.
And could it include some of the sites that people might see? So we've had one of the members of the public talk about that and the impact that it has on them and their family. I think those are important things we need to consider.
Gary, I don't know whether you can come in on whether that would be a planning issue as such.
Yeah, I was going to come in there. I think it's about intensity of use. So if a use has a particular characteristic, whether it is disturbance or other comings and goings, then, if you have one or two in a street, that, might be seen as acceptable and part of an acceptable mix. But, if it then starts to have, starts to change a character of the area to the detriment, then, I think it could be. I think it's, it's all kind of activities really. And the more of this kind of use you have in a particular location, that all gets compounded, doesn't it? And that's, we've heard a lot from the public forum statements about that. So I think, to that extent, I think that is a legitimate planning ground.
Okay. So for questions, I've got Harriet, Mike and Fee. And please remember to take your hands down when you've asked your question, because there's currently 5 people with hands up.
Okay, I'm just coming back to the same issue again. There weren't any formal complaints of noise, you say, despite the fact that the statements mentioned shouting and screaming and wailing and kids being kept awake at night. Isn't that partly to do with the decency of the neighbours who didn't want to complain about vulnerable old people? But surely, doesn't it count that they made representations to their councillors? And I believe there was a public meeting as well. Do those not, I mean, I know they may not be recorded in the same way, but surely those are of some relevance to this issue of disturbance.
Perhaps Councillor Hants could confirm, but I believe the meeting was relating to parking issues on the Glen and Belvedere Road. So that was what the public meeting was referred to. However, obviously there are anecdotal statements from neighbours about noise and disturbance, which we can give some weight in a decision, but it's not as clear as, say, a call being made to the police about a certain issue or being made to the council about consistent noise complaints, because obviously they can be confirmed by our pollution control team or by the police going out to site.
Just in case anyone didn't see, Fee put a thumbs up about it being just about parking. Mike, you're next.
Yeah, so I know you're not supposed to have too many refusal reasons in case things go to the planning inspectorate. But what if we just refused it based on parking and the planning inspector didn't think that parking was a valid refusal reason, but he or she did think that over-concentration was a refusal reason? Could the inspector have it refused based on over-concentration, or can he or she only refuse it for the same reason the council did?
I think Harry's going to come in on that.
Yes, definitely. In the way that you as a committee can consider all material considerations, it's open to the decision maker, and that's yourselves here today, to refuse it on whatever relevant planning grounds you feel are appropriate. And the same should apply to a planning inspector, if it got to appeal. Normally, though, a planning inspector will start their decision letter by saying, "Oh, the issues in dispute are as follows." So I think I'd be misguiding you if I was to say, if you went for a single reason, then an inspector would consider the others. They probably would. Their decision notice would cover those very briefly, but I'd be honest with you, I don't think they'll get the level of attention that it would get if there were reasons for refusal. So that's my advice on really the scope of an inspector's decision making. And just to clarify what you've got before you, because this is one that's deferred and has been brought back, we've got an unusual situation where, having looked at the really gaps in the evidence and the parking survey, we're now saying professionally it should be refused on the parking issue. But then, having looked at the other issues that members raised last time around, we've also suggested 2 further reasons for refusal that cover the mixed and balanced and over-concentration issue. And that's following a process where we've looked at whether reasons like that would stand up at appeal. And so our conclusion is, whilst that's not our professional recommendation, those reasons could be used and probably could be defended at appeal, certainly to the extent that they're not likely to generate an award of costs, which is our kind of our baseline, really. So I hope that you kind of understand that advice.
Thank you, Gary. Any follow-up, Mike? Are you happy?
No.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Fee?
Sorry about that. I was just sending everyone a message saying I've just put my hand down again, and apologies for repeated hand raisings and lowerings. So my points were answered by what.
Okay.
My question was answered by what Mike was saying.
Okay, thanks. Then Joe, and then I'd like to move on to the discussion after that. Go on, Joe.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on what was said around the issue about sort of disturbance and calling of police or contacting your local councillor. I cannot honestly believe that anybody would call the police if they think something, no matter how unpleasant, is part of someone's core business. So as in running a business that is looking after people that are probably quite close to death and who have very little control over how they can behave and things. I don't think anyone would be phoning the police. So to me, it worries me that we would have, and sorry, this isn't a comment, it kind of is a question, because I want to get a response. It does worry me that we might not say this is a problem because it's part of a legitimate business. So, I mean, I suppose is the issue. The thing is, what would people phone the police and complain about? They phone the police and complain because they thought there might be a danger out there or a threat to life or something. You wouldn't phone the police to complain. Like if you had lived next door to a cement mixing business, cement producing business, you won't keep phoning up to complain about the noise. You might not be happy about the fact that you live next door to one, but you're not going to complain to the police about it. So it just worries me that we would measure the effect that a business, being close to a business might have on people's lives by the number of times they have or haven't called the police. So I just wonder if you could just take that into, consideration. Just think about that a little bit, because I don't think it's very fair on residents.
Shall I just clarify? It's not just complaints to the police, it's also to the pollution control department of the council. So there are measures in place where people can contact the council to make complaints. But you make a valid point that if you live next to somewhere that is a noise generating business, which would potentially include a care home, then you're less likely to make a complaint. But perhaps it's something that isn't necessarily then a valid reason for refusal.
Yeah, but it's just, the problem is that, people go to their councillors because they want to change something. They want to change it from the current status quo and make it different. Where you're in a situation where you're complaining about antisocial behaviour, which effectively is noise late at night or, people throwing litter or whatever it is, then it's not about changing a status quo. It's actually getting things back to the way they should be. So I just think that's it's a different issue. And to me, especially where we are talking about a planning, we're actually discussing about whether it's a good idea to increase a business effectively in an area where people are already unhappy about its impact. So that is not the same as me saying I'm going to open another nightclub up and have loads of illegal raves. It's a different thing, because I can't, if it's a business that's legitimate, then it's a business that's legitimate. You're not going to phone the police about it, but you still have the right to say, I don't want any more of this in my neighbourhood. So I just think that it just worries me. And you can talk about pollution control, but in the end, what are pollution control going to do about people, people with dementia who are, making a lot of noise at night? They can't do anything. What can they do about that? It's just, it just doesn't seem right to me.
Is there anything the officers want to add to that? You don't have to.
No.
Sure. So let's move on to the discussion then. I think Joe got in there first. I don't know if you want to add anything to what you just said, Joe.
Yeah, well, in terms of the discussion and the debate, I absolutely do think that, and I agree with what Mike said, I don't think it's appropriate for us to just talk about parking, because I actually think that a lot of people were concerned about more than just parking, and I think we would have been less likely to refuse the application if it had been just about parking. For me, it's about the impact, and I suppose it is those 2 points probably sort of combined. It is the impact that a business is already having on a residential community, regardless of what that business is. And by increasing that business, it's going to have a greater impact. So I don't know how that ties in with them, but my view is that we absolutely must stick to our original decision to refuse this application.
Thanks, Joe. I've got Carla, Mike, Sultan and Harriet. So Carla first, and then Richard at the end. Go on, Carla.
Didn't realise I was next. So I think, given that we should be turning this down on point 1 about parking, that seems fairly clear cut to me. And in fact, in the minutes, we might want to, if others agree with me, record that we think the point, that point is perhaps even stronger than outlined in the officer's report, with reference to the points made in Oliver Bennett's statement, which I'm just pulling up, which, because the report doesn't mention the loss of 4 spaces due to ambulance bays, which makes that number left over even tighter. So I think the question for us is, are we also going to add those points about mixed and balanced communities? I'm ambivalent on that. I can see arguments both ways. If we do, then I would suggest to strengthen it, that, as Councillor Sargent has said, we don't give very much weight to the fact that there haven't been formal complaints, because I agree that I don't think many neighbours would think of submitting a formal complaint to the council, police or other official organisation about something which they perceive to be, they probably perceive to be not fixable given the current situation. So their action here is to try and stop making it worse, but they probably don't think that the problem can be got rid of entirely. And again, if we're talking about mixed and balanced communities, I would definitely suggest that we made reference to the number of people on the road, not the number of buildings, because I think it's the number of people that determines the impact it has. And although the officer commented that the numbers proposed by the public seem to assume a very high concentration of residents in the residential home compared to residents in ordinary accommodation on the other side of the road, I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that a lot of those houses will have much lower occupancy rates than a residential home, much more living space per person. So those numbers of it already being around 50-50 on that road, I would say, looking at the size of the houses sounds about right. And I definitely would argue that 50-50 between residential home occupants and ordinary members of the public is already not a mixed and balanced community.
Thanks, Carla. Mike next.
Oh, just quickly, I think we should refuse it on both parking and over concentration.
Thanks, Mike. Nice and succinct. Sultan.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so I know I didn't ask any questions, but I personally think that I remain in the same view that I had previously. I understand the issues that the community raising, but if you really look at this, that there are space there to build further extension and have 17 further beds, and for that reason, I don't think so that staff level increase hugely, because there is already the saying there's 8 permanent staff at the moment there, and for the extra 17, it would be only 2 more person staff member will increase. And in terms of visitors, for those 17 people, I don't assume that there will be influx of visitors every day which will increase significantly into the add into the traffic and emergency also, emergency vehicles. So I remain, despite that there are some very important points made by residents, but in terms of these facilities across the city and across the country, we see in some places you find reasonable roads, in some places it's very narrow, small, shrink road, but they are operating, they're existing. Naturally, our country's roads are very small, and most of the roads are small. So I still see that I still remain in the same view that we should have approved it. But however, I know it was refused, and of course, I feel a bit for the officers that the reasons they are giving, these are the reasons almost it was not looked at in the beginning. I know these are not really valid, well, I would say valid now, but it wasn't looked at previously, and it was recommended for approval. So I remain in the same view. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that Gary wants to just come in on a point before we continue.
Yes, sorry, apologies for intervening, Chair. I just wanted to guard against the use, explicit reference to numbers, population numbers within the reasons for refusal on over concentration. The reason for that, Chair, is that we don't have the solid evidence about that really. I know it's everyone's intuition that is the case, but I think if within the reason for refusal, if we were that specific, I think we could land ourselves in a bit of difficulties at appeal. I mean, when this goes to appeal, assuming this is going to be refused, then residents have a further opportunity to make representations to the planning inspectorate. And certainly that's a route where residents can make those points and produce whatever evidence they have about their own street. I would just sort of guard against explicit reference to the numbers in the actual reason for refusal because we just don't have that particular evidence.
Thanks, Gary.
Right, I just very quickly, Tom, very quickly, just one. So
go on, very quickly.
If you look at the reason I remain in the position, if you look at the care homes, many of the care homes, even though they have capacity of far more than they have at the moment occupied. I know care homes in this city or neighboring authorities, they have 50 or 100, say for example 50 covers, but they only have 35, 40. So I think, in balance, it should have been a good idea to approve, but there you are. I think majority spoken.
Okay, so I've got Harriet, then Richard, then Fee, then Nicola.
I'm certainly sticking to what I thought last time. I really share the view of Joe and Mike that we should put in the over concentration as well as the parking. Actually, I agree with Sultan that any street in Bristol, you're likely to get complaints about parking because, parking is really pressured. But the over concentration and the impact of having so many care homes in one street. I mean, there's nothing like it in Bristol. I've been to a lot of care homes and it just doesn't work like that, not in a small residential street. We know the recommendation is that those places should be built on the outskirts of cities where there is proper facility for parking and where there isn't the offensive effect on the resident population. I also want to point out two things that we discussed last time which haven't been mentioned. The first of which is this is an ideal street for family-friendly accommodation because it's very close to schools, it's very close to the downs and to shops, and all those things are wanted by families. And frankly, I don't take that point about the staff that was made. The nursing home should be providing food for their staff, and anyway, they'll probably bring it all in picnic boxes if I know anything about places of that kind. So, but it really bothers me that we should lose the 3 or 4 flats in this block, which will provide really good accommodation. So to me, it is really important that we include the overconcentration, which I think is proven whether we go by numbers or just by houses in effects, because I'm not sure that the parking alone might not be refused by the inspectors as a sufficient reason. So I understand Gary's points about, you know, the dodginess of it, but I really think in this case it's quite important, and I would really ask that we do include those overconcentration clauses. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So Richard, then Fee, then Nicola, and I'd like to move to a vote because we are kind of running out of time. Go on, Richard.
I missed last month's committee, but I fully share the concerns of members and residents, whether it's 29% or 50% by population care homes in Belvedere Road. In my view, that's hugely imbalanced, and we should record that. Secondly, I think the case about parking standards is well made. Finally, I would say you may recall the notorious case in my ward about 18 months ago, which was refused by committee purely on affordable housing, although we argued that urban design should be included. When that was eventually appealed, the inspector ruled that it should go ahead. He didn't uphold the purely the affordable housing grounds, and he said the arguments we put about urban design, the council should have made. So in my view, I'm agreeing with Harriet, Joe and others. We ought to have both arguments for refusal.
Thanks, Richard. Fee?
Right, well, surprise, surprise, I agree. I think we should reject this application on a number of grounds. First of all, parking. I'm reassured that I'm not in fact losing my mind and that the original survey doesn't reflect in any way my experience of this area, where I've rarely seen, if ever, more than 2 parking spaces free there. So that's number one. Imbalance to the local community, absolutely. And also the harm to the local the harm to the local, what was it called? Things like rubbish and amenity, that was it, harm to local amenity. I think that what the residents have presented us with is rather more than anecdote. They've given us some evidence of the impact that the existing setup is having on enjoyment of their local neighbourhood. And this is looking to increase this residential place by around, was it 40%, something like that? So it's reasonable to assume that any existing harms to their local amenity will be increased. So I think we should include that as well. It's DN2, isn't it? So yep, surprise, surprise, against. Thank you.
Thanks, Fee. Nicola.
Yeah, I just feel we need to reject this on parking and the balanced communities issue, which is a big one. I wasn't here for the first debate to vote on it, but I did listen to it, and I've not been satisfied that there's been any real change. So I'm going to vote against it.
Okay, so I think we're ready to take a vote. Does anyone want to put a motion forward? Harriet? Sorry, Fee, Harriet got there first.
I propose that we accept the recommendation to refuse offers by the officers, but also include, as well as the parking, that we include the over-concentration issues.
So to clarify, is that both of the reasons on page 59?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a seconder to that? I think I saw Carla first. Plenty of people to choose from. Okay, so let's vote then. So we're voting on a motion to refuse the application for the 3 reasons outlined at the bottom of page 58 and top of page 59 of the report. It's going to be a named vote. I'll go through each person individually, just say for, against, or abstain. Obviously, in this context, for means you're in favour of refusing the application for those reasons. So Carla, do you first.
For.
Fee?
For.
So just to repeat, I'm going to repeat when people say. So Carla and Fee were both for. Harriet?
For.
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 Joe?
For.
For. Mike?
For.
For. Richard?
For.
Nicola?
For.
For. Sultan? You're on mute, Sultan.
Against.
Against. And I'll vote for as well. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for versus 9 versus 1 against, 9 in total. Means the application is refused. Okay, so that's the end of that item. I want to propose we have a 10-minute break, comfort break.
Yeah.
Can I just stress though that we come back at let's say 22, so 9-minute comfort break, but please actually be at your desk with the video on, because you need to be visible, because otherwise we don't know if you're in the room. Okay, so see you all at 22. Jeremy, are you there?
Yeah.
Can you make me a host, please?
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were a host, actually. Apologies.
I don't think I am. It certainly doesn't say so next to my name.
Okay, I'll do
Just
that.
it means that I can put people's hands down when they finish
Oh, yeah, no, definitely.
speaking.
Yeah.
I've forgotten to put their hands down.
I thought I'd already done that. Apologies.
There we go. Thanks. Just a reminder, as people come back in, the webcast is still active. Carla and Mike, are you back with us yet?
Apologies. Yes, I am. It was just taking a while to come round.
Don't worry. Give Mike a few seconds. Okay, looks like we're all here then. So let's get started on the next item, or the final item, which is the former St John's Lane Health Centre. We don't have a public forum for this item, although statements were submitted, which of course we've all read. So let's move straight to the officer report, please.
Chair, sorry to interrupt. Is Councillor Khan?
I was completely gone from the meeting.
Yeah.
Apologies. That's why I started, because I saw all the faces there. But yeah, no, you're right. Okay, let's. Can you see if you can get hold of Sultan, and then we'll start that item again. That's my mistake.
I have sent an email to Councillor Khan. I have tried contacting by phone before, but he doesn't. It just went to answer phone. I will try that. Just give it a.
Well, he was definitely there when I said back at 22, so hopefully it's just technical issues rather than.
I'll also resend the link.
I want to get started, to be honest, because we're going to run into the COVID briefing if we're not careful. So just give me a couple of minutes. Any luck?
No, I've left a message on his answer machine, but and just said that if you don't join immediately, then you won't be able to participate.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much more I can do than that, really.
I think let's just get started. We're going to run out of time otherwise. So yeah, unfortunately, if he does manage to rejoin, he won't be able to take part. So as I was saying, there's no public forum for this item. So let's move to the officer report, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll share my screen again. Can I just check you can see that?
Yep.
Great, thank you. So this application seeks full planning permission for the demolition of the former health centre and the construction of a Part 3 and Part 4 storey building with 29 flats. The site itself is located in Windmill Hill in South Bristol and is located on the southern side of St John's Lane at the junction with Wedmore Vale. The site is currently occupied by a single-storey building with a car park to the rear. So the east of the site is a two-storey building just here which is formerly occupied by William Hill and is now vacant. Victoria Park Primary School is to the north, and you've got residential properties to the south and the west. The doctor's surgery was vacated in 2018 when the Wedmore practice moved to the new Marksbury Road surgery, which is just around the corner to the south of the site. In terms of the site's current appearance, so you can see that the existing low quality, existing low quality building remains on site and is currently in a state of dereliction. The land to the rear is vacant, and there are a number of unsightly fences on site to stop fly tipping and antisocial behaviour. Moving on to the proposed development, so there would be a building which would front both Wedmore Vale and St John's Lane with 29 affordable apartments. The proposed development would be constructed in red bricks with recessed standing seam metal fourth storey, which can be just seen on the top here. Each of the flats would benefit from amenity space, either in the form of a balcony at first and second floor level, a terrace at roof level, or gardens at ground floor level. Moving on to the internal arrangements, so the flats would be a mixture of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom units. The apartments would be accessed via external decks, which can be seen in the dotted line to the rear of the building here. And this would mean that all of the units would be dual aspect, so they would have a view to the front and the rear of the building. At ground, first and second floor, there would be 9 units each, as laid out on this slide here. There would also be 8 car parking spaces located to the rear of the building. These would be accessed via the existing access onto Wedmore Vale. At ground floor level, there would also be 54 cycle parking spaces. Moving on to the recessed upper floor. So there would be 2 3-bedroom units. These would have roof terraces, and a condition is proposed to include screens to block any overlooking to surrounding residences. This slide shows the 3D model of the proposed development. As you can see from the lower 2 images here, the 4th story, the metal roof element would be largely concealed behind the parapet of the 3rd story. In terms of the units themselves, they would all be for affordable housing with a mixture of social rent, shared ownership and affordable rent. 9 of these units would be secured as affordable housing in perpetuity via Section 106 agreement, and this would be policy compliant 30%. In terms of public comments on the scheme, so on the scheme as originally submitted, there are a total of 77 comments. These comments in objection largely focused on the concerns about over-intensification of the site, around scale and massing, concerns about impact on parking and impact on residential amenity through overshadowing and overlooking. When the revised scheme was submitted, which is as presented to you today, we reconsulted with neighbours and a total of 11 comments were received. This scheme obviously reduced it from the number of units from 35 to 29, increased the number of car parking spaces on site, reduced the scale and massing of the building and changed the materials to red brick, more in keeping with the neighbourhood. As I say, no new issues on this reconsultation were received, but it was generally commented by the neighbours that did comment that they felt like the changes weren't significant enough to warrant their support. In terms of the statements that you have before you in the committee pack today, so there are 2 statements submitted by two members, one in support of the scheme from the applicant and one objection from the neighbour. That raised concerns about the impacts on car parking and traffic in the junction onto St John's Lane, objection to the height of the building, concerns about overlooking and overshadowing, and also concerns about noise with the increase in use of the site. So moving on to the key issues as outlined in my report. So the principle of development is supported as the scheme would contribute towards the delivery of affordable housing, and the doctor's practice has been provided with new modern premises at the Marksbury Road development in accordance with policy BCS 13. In terms of design, so the massing of the building has been reduced to a level considered acceptable to a city design group. The 4th floor is recessed and the scheme is largely consistent with other recently approved schemes on St John's Lane. This was considered acceptable when applying approach of an urban intensification, which is consistent with the urban living SPD. The proposed use of red brick would accord with the existing character of the area whilst employing a more modern architectural design to the site. And each of the units, as I've said, would be dual aspect to meet space standards, so would provide a high quality environment for future occupiers. And CDG commented that the centrally located entrance and lobby creates a distinct architectural feature, which is welcome, attractive and easy to use in accordance with the urban living SPD. Moving on to transport. So the 8 car parking spaces proposed are considered sufficient by TDM due to the tenure and type of homes and given the sustainable location of the site on a high frequency bus route. A parking survey was submitted, our favourite topic of the afternoon. However, this one has shown the location of drop curves and other restrictions in accordance with BCC's parking survey methodology. And also a video of the survey has been supplied to Transport Development Management and has confirmed the approach taken and the location of the available spaces within that survey. So the 2 surveys that were undertaken identified 16 and 17 spaces respectively within 150 metres of the site. And this would be sufficient to accommodate the additional parking demand associated with the development. The refuse and recycling proposals are considered acceptable in their location, and a presentation point is proposed as part of the scheme. And the bike storage is also considered to be acceptable. Moving on to residential amenity, so a shadow study for the original scheme. So the impacts actually would be less than the ones demonstrated on screen now. So this demonstrates that there'll be a limited impact on neighbours due to overshadowing as a result of the site being to the north of most of the residential properties. The proposed development would be sufficiently situated far enough away from neighbouring properties so as not to be overbearing in nature. And whilst there would be a slight increase in overlooking to neighbouring properties, given the nature of the proposals and the increase in use of the site, and the proposals are consistently in excess of the 21 metre window-to-window separation distances required. And as I've mentioned previously, where there is potential for overlooking of gardens, a condition has been recommended for the provision of screens at the upper floor level. So in conclusion, the proposed development for 29 affordable apartments is recommended for approval, subject to Section 106 agreement, securing the affordable housing, the 30% that is, and contributions to travel planning and car club to reduce reliance on the private car. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Does anyone have any questions, please? Carla, Joe, and Nicola. Go on, Carla.
Thank you. Apologies, bear with me. I have 4 questions. First one, in the report, you say that it would be recommended to have a gate to secure the parking area. But if, as I understand it, that isn't conditioned. The condition about the gate talks about what the gate should be like if there is one, and it talks about any gate, but it doesn't condition that there should be one. So I wondered if the officer could explain why that was and if that could be changed.
So the gated access is that condition that you referenced is a standard condition. I'm just going to check the site plan, which is on screen. So I think that does show. I think I've chopped off the annotation, but that does show a gate on there. So there would be a gate provided.
It says in your report that there wouldn't be one. This will not feature a gate, which could result in unauthorised access and increased risk of antisocial behaviour. A gate, blah, 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 is recommended.
Is that from the Transport Development Management comments?
Oh, it might be. Hang on, scroll.
Yes, sorry. So apologies. So that is their response, and then they've requested 2 minor changes, which I've hopefully clarified in the key issues. So that's the provision of the shared access. So it would be rather than segregating pedestrians and cars at the access point, it's now a shared access, and also there was a provision of a gate as well.
Okay, so those comments were for an earlier version.
Yes, yeah, effectively there was one. Those 2 changes were made via the latest plan, so it was just a couple of minor changes.
Okay, thank you. That was easy. Next question. It's good to see that they've gone with quite a lot of sustainability measures and MBHR and whatnot. I'm slightly concerned about risk of overheating of the top floor, given that it's entirely metal clad and surrounded by paving. I just wondered if any study had been done into risk of overheating.
Yes, so they've provided an overheating assessment, and I believe mechanical heat recovery ventilation, I can't remember whether I've said that in the right order, is proposed. So I think that our Sustainable Cities team were happy that that would be sufficient to mitigate any potential overheating.
Okay, I will, all right. I will just comment that it's more sustainable to design something not to overheat in the first place than to design something that requires mechanical ventilation, which itself uses energy and emits carbon, and that perhaps officers could encourage applicants to design things that are inherently low carbon rather than those which require things like that to keep them livable. But I'm not going to try and design that by committee now, so that's fine. Another question about conditions. Again, I might have misunderstood here, but there was a comment in the report that the proposed location of the bin store in the drawings would prohibit access to the cycle store, and that could be conditioned to fix it. But looking at current condition 18 about access to cycle provision, that condition is a standardly worded condition that talks about cycle parking and bin store, and above it bin storage being provided as per the plans. And as far as I can tell, the plans are currently a problem. So we don't want to condition as per the plans that obstruct access. We would want to condition to change those.
So again, that's been captured in the revised site plan. So they've now actually moved the presentation point. I apologise. I thought I had put a clarification at the bottom of the TDM comment, but I've not included that, so I apologise. But that's actually been clarified within or changed within the revised plan as well. So I can share my screen quickly.
That would be I'm just trying to scroll to it quickly. It
yeah, like please, if you could share.
So initially the bin point, the presentation point was right in front of this door, and then they've moved that further away from that doorway.
An out-of-date drawing then, because the drawing that I've got in the document still does have the bin storage.
Yeah, I agree, it does.
Oh, apologies. I must have attached the wrong plan. Sorry.
Yes, hence the plan that we've got not having a gate either.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, that explains that one. Finally, stay where you are, because it's a question about the plan. Several of the plans have a sort of rectangular cloud shape on them, covering different areas on different plans. And as far as I can tell, it's not annotated to explain what it is. In some of the drawing, oh no, they're in the key. The cloud corresponds to a table of master apartment schedule, but to be honest, I'm not any of the wiser why that relates to the rectangular cloud.
So that's just highlighting amendments to the scheme. So for example, there's been a highlight around the shared access point on the plan that I'm sharing at the moment. and then also a cloud around the changed bin presentation point. Just trying to see if there are any others in the, and then, for example, here, where we've reduced the scheme on the right-hand side here, there's a cloud. So apologies, that doesn't actually denote what the a sort of a physical manifestation of what the proposals are. It's just,
wasn't sure what it was. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
apologies. Yes, so it's just highlighting where the applicant has made changes.
Okay, great. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thanks. So Joe's next.
Sorry, keep pressing the wrong buttons. Okay, well, just following on from what Carla said about the top floor. It does look a bit like a plant room rather than a residence, which is slightly concerning. Yeah, I don't understand why it needed to be metal in the first place. You mentioned decks going up to every entrance. I wasn't sure if I understood that right, which suggests that they've all got their own individual entrance. Is that right?
Yes. So
Okay.
let me just show you on the. Unfortunately, it's not particularly clear on this plan. I'm just trying to see whether there are. Again, I've not included an image of the rear access. Apologies. But effectively, it's an outdoor walkway. So
is it a walk up? Is that what you're saying it is? It's slightly worrying, bearing in mind walk-ups seem to be the thing that we're trying to move away from in Bristol. They've not got the best reputation, and it would be quite good to be able to see that a little bit more clearly. Anyway,
I will pull that up
right.
as a plan.
And then the other question I had was when you were talking about Section 106 and affordable, you said that 9 units would be affordable in perpetuity under Section 106. So presumably the other 20, you anticipate them eventually being sold on and then just going into the open market. Is that the case?
No, that's not correct. So the applicant is an affordable housing provider. Yeah. So they will be providing 100% affordable. However, we can only require that the applicant provides a policy compliant level of affordable housing. So that's why we are only able to secure the 9 units in perpetuity. So eventually, at some point, they will be able to do that if they seem so deem fit. But we cannot require a developer to provide in excess of the affordable housing units in perpetuity. And just a point on the walk-up flats as well. There's a number of measures in here which have been designed on the basis of our urban living SPD, and our urban living SPD does include details of basically ways to get dual aspect units, and walk-up flats are considered to be, as you described them, are considered to be a good way to create that, and things like creating the communal access and then each having their own separate access direct into the flat is considered to be better than a shared space effect or a shared area that doesn't necessarily get looked after in the same way.
Assuming that it does get looked after at all, that's the problem. But it just seems to me that business about what technically, in the letter of the law is classed as affordable and what is in practice affordable, at least for the foreseeable future. I think that is something that ought to be made a little bit more clear in applications where you do have what is seemingly 100% affordable because it's a housing association. Because not all some housing associations are developing and are including property for open market. So I think
that's not the case in this scheme.
Yeah, but I think it needs to be made clear what is legally affordable, if you see what I mean, and what is just this is what we're doing.
Okay, let's move on. So I've got Nicola, then Leslie, then Harriet. So Nicola, you first.
Hello, yeah. Just looking at the report, it looks as though there's going to be, if all the accommodation is built and used as it's suggested, 86 people living in this area. and it's opposite a primary school, and it's on the junction of a number of main roads. And there is mention within the report of hedgehogs and bats and nesting birds, but there's absolutely no mention of children and where they're expected to play. So I just wondered why that was. Even the section 106 doesn't talk about any provision for children. So yeah, some reasons why there's no mention of consideration for children in this development.
There was a small amount of sort of communal amenity space proposed to the rear of the development, but it was such a small amount that it was considered that it would be more valuable to use it for parking, given the parking sort of pressures that around in the area. Obviously, each flat does have its own amenity space, which is very, very rare in a development of this kind. So for each flat to have its own either garden or terrace or balcony is obviously a positive for the residents on site. And then it's probably less than a 5-minute walk, maybe a 2-3 minute walk to Victoria Park, just on the other side of the road. So in that sense, it's considered that it sort of catered very well for play space for children.
It is on the junction of major roads, and you know, we have to safeguard. The city council has a duty to safeguard children.
I assume you don't want to.
Sorry.
You don't
I didn't know whether was that a question. Sorry.
I'm just asking a question. You know, I just think it's really important that these things are considered when we're looking at planning applications. You know, thinking about balanced communities.
Yeah, absolutely, and that has been considered, and that's within key. I think it's key issue A of my report. And then also, obviously, it's been assessed as part of the design of the development. So they each have their own defensible space, which would obviously not sort of conflict with them with the junction. And then obviously our transport highways team have looked at the scheme and have considered that there wouldn't be sort of danger on the basis of the use of the junction there either.
Okay, let's move on to the next person. Leslie.
Sorry, just a delay in getting it to.
No worries, go ahead.
Well, Carl and Joe have asked most of my questions, but there's one. What do you expect the screens on the top deck to look like? Because if they're, I would have thought it needs to be gated or fenced and gated, because otherwise, if it's just a few shrubs in pots, then people can still walk behind them and press their noses up against the window.
Yes, so there's a condition for full details to be provided. So that would be secured by, the details would obviously have to be signed off by both our urban design team and then myself as a planning officer, assessing whether it would provide sufficient screening in perpetuity. So as I say, those details haven't been completely finalised yet, but I would imagine it would be, for example, a metal screen or a brick screen similar to the existing development or the proposed development. Sorry.
Right, more or less a wall then.
Well, no, it would, as I say, it hasn't been designed yet, but it would be potentially a metal screen or something similar to that, or potentially even some. I've seen it on another development that I've been involved in where it's been translucent glass, so it still allows the light in, but obviously you can't see through it.
I see. Okay.
Thanks, Harriet.
Well, mine is a sort of variant on what Leslie's just asked, and it's again about this top floor. I was just a bit concerned about the safety issue. Where are these screens going to be? And I mean, it looks as if people could just go and jump off the top. And obviously that takes us back to Nicola's concerns about children's safety as well. So can you just reassure me that that those places are safe. By the way, otherwise, I think, you know, I know that those balconies and little gardens are quite small, but it's better than many other ones we've looked at. So I think that's quite a positive feature.
Well, I'll just share my screen again. So that you can see here that there is a railing along the rear roof terrace area here. So obviously that would stop potentially any people potentially wanting to jump off or what have you. And obviously building regs would be required to sign off to ensure that the structure is safe and doesn't lead to risk to life as well. So that's the roof terrace to the rear there. This image doesn't have the screen to the rear at the moment on this design, as I say, because they're yet to be designed.
You're on mute, Harriet.
Oh, sorry. Can we just go back to that picture? Sorry, Alex. Could we just go back again?
Yes, sorry.
Lost for some reason. I just wanted, it's just the front bit I was wanting to. Oh.
Sorry. Just trying to make it slightly larger.
It's this front bit I was thinking of. How high is that wall or whatever it is? Is it a wall?
Along the, yeah, it is. Yeah. So there's a brick parapet wall, and then so the main access, and then obviously the rear the terrace to the rear here would be.
Yeah.
But I don't have an exact measurement for how high the parapet is, but it's sort of half the size nearly of the entire fourth floor. So I guess if that fourth floor is probably around 2.2 meters, the parapet's probably just over a meter and a half.
And those flats on the top, how many beds are they?
So that's 2 3-bedroom units.
So there could be kids there, couldn't there?
They would classify as a family house, yes, that's correct.
I feel slightly worried about that aspect. Otherwise, I really like this proposal, but it's just, you know, there are stories of people falling off balconies when they're drunk. And I'm not saying the kids would be drunk, but, you know, it's just slightly, I'd like to, I don't know what could be done to make it a bit more secure, but it just slightly worries me, that's all.
As I say, and building regs would obviously sign off any sort of glazing system or whatever it might be for the parapets. So they would need to confirm that it would be safe and wouldn't sort of lead to risk to life.
Thanks. Does anyone else want to ask any questions?
Tom.
Hi, Sultan. I did send you a message. You arrived too late.
No.
We gave you 5 minutes and you weren't with us, so unfortunately you can't take part in this. I did send you a message.
Did you? I think I just came in the right time.
No, we gave you 5 minutes beyond, I'm afraid.
When Alex was just when he just started.
Yes, sorry, you weren't. We waited for you beyond. We said back at 22, and you weren't here until gone 1:45. So
yeah,
we did start.
Just to confirm, Chair, it needs to be at the very beginning of the item, and just after the item presentation had started.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? No. Okay, so let's move to the discussion then. Does anyone want to go first? Richard.
Thanks, Chairman. In my view, the revised scheme is a great improvement. It addresses my concerns about balcony height. It's in a sustainable location with a school opposite and very near a park. In fact, I recently went to the relocated GP surgery about 200 yards ago, where you saw all that site, which we visited on one of our site visits our last seems impressive. So I have no hesitations in our be backing this.
Thanks, Richard. Fee?
Okay, I'm also happy to back this. I'm not a mad keen fan of the red brick, but that's my own personal taste, and I'm prepared to be shouted down on that one. And also the Civic Society seems to think it's okay, so that's fine by me. It's in an unused space, which is not a place of great loveliness, and it's all going to be affordable for the time being, so I'm voting for it.
Thanks, Fee. Carla?
Yeah, I'm broadly happy with it. The only caveats are the point I made about making things low carbon by design rather than sort of having to reverse engineer them with mechanical ventilation where possible. And one other thing, which was also raised in the public forum, is the zigzag frontage, I assume is predominantly aesthetic and also to angle windows away from overlooking, but it does result in some quite awkwardly shaped rooms, which would be pretty difficult to furnish because you wouldn't be able to get desks, wardrobes, tables, etc. against a lot of those corners. So it's not enough for me to turn it down, but I guess I would like it on record to the applicants to consider the usability of the rooms for the occupants and not just the aesthetics from the outside.
Thanks, Carla. Harriet?
I really like the design. It's much better than what was there before. The slight concern about the parking, I think, is not a real one, because actually I do know this area and there are quite a lot of streets behind off Wedmore and across where there will be spaces, I think. So I'm definitely going to back it, and if there isn't much dissent, I might put a motion that we accept the officer's proposal. Or is it too early?
I'll second.
Yeah, I'm happy to go forward unless someone's super keen to speak. Who was it that said that they'd second? Mike. Thanks, Mike. Okay, so we'll go to the vote on the officer, voting on the officer recommendation to approve as laid out in the report. Names vote, obviously, as before. So first, Carla, please.
4.
4, thank you. Fee?
4.
4, thank you. Harriet?
4.
Thank you. 4. Joe?
4.
4, thank you, Joe. Mike?
4.
Thank you, Mike. 4. Richard?
4.
4, thank you. Nicola?
4.
4, thank you. Leslie?
4.
4, thank you, Leslie, and I'll vote 4 as well. So that's unanimous. So the application is approved. Thanks very much, everyone. That's the end of the meeting. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Chair.
Bye.
Thanks, Tom. Bye.